Now we're going to move on to the second paper, which is by Brita Brenna. She's a professor of museology and cultural history at the Institute for Culture Studies and Oriental Languages at the University of Oslo. She works with the histories of exhibitions, collections, museums, copies, natural history, and fieldwork. She's a member of the Heritage Experience Initiative and the Lifetimes Project. So, Brita, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be part of this gang of lifetimers talking today, and also very happy that about this conference. I think it's just wonderful to be here, and I'm kind of sort of scared about talking about time to such an audience. So I hope I will get through this sort of with my honor still there. I have had an abstract which I'm not going to talk about, but a title that I'm going to talk about. So they didn't really match. That was something wrong there. But anyway, what I'm going to talk about is 18th century work, and my title is Fast Forwards to the Great Conflageration, reading Erich Pontoppidan's The Novelty of the World. I'm not going to show you a PowerPoint, so you're going to just listen to me. And I want to talk about history. I find it overwhelmingly difficult to understand history. Is it a feature or aspect of the world and all the things that dwell therein? Is it a way of narrating the past to make sense of the present, or is it a means of envisioning other possible futures? These questions are too grand, maybe too banal, and maybe too unspecific, but they are leading my way into reading a work that was published in Copenhagen in 1757, and I will come back to that soon. There are multiple problems challenging the practice of doing history today. One problem goes under the name of nature, another under the designation time. How, a poor historian may ask, am I to include and pay attention to nature in my investigations? What is nature? A backdrop, a cause, an effect? Or is there no such thing called nature, only an entanglement of beings and becomings? The problem of time confronts this same historian, me in this instance, querying the very basis of what history is about. How many times are there, and which of them are open for historical inquiry? Is history about time or about change, and what are their connections? How might a history without a beginning and an end look like? And am I to account for the times of nature with the same means as with the times of humans? The Anthropocene, or whatever we want to call our present predicament, is forcing us to think anew about these questions and to look for other futures of history. And as historians, we find them in the past, as we too often do, maybe. One way forward is to look for precursors that tackled questions of time and nature. Historians are now finding anticipations of the understanding that humans have a profound influence on the planet in works by, for example, Buffon. Others find forerunners for understanding the Earth as a superorganism in the works of geologists at the end of the 18th century, like Hutton. My protagonist here, Erich Pontoppidan, should maybe not be seen as someone who anticipated the Anthropocene, but this is what I will argue. Firstly, that he can be seen as someone who tried to come to grips with the question about how the Earth and its geology had changed and been shaped by the same time that was working to shape and change human society. And secondly, as someone who firmly believed that human actions decisively influenced the fabric and destiny of the world. In his treatise on the novelty of the world, or natural and historical proof that this world is not eternal, but must some 1,000 years ago have taken its beginning, which is the title, Pontoppidan argued that through natural and historical proofs, it was possible to ascertain that the world was of recent origin. It was about 6,000 years old, and the proof for this could be found in the fact that nature had undergone huge transmutations. Likewise, human society had progressed considerably in the arts, sciences, languages, technologies, and material conditions, a fact which proved that the earth could not be eternal. Transformation, improvement, and progress are threads running through this treatise, threads spun with the aid of natural history, mathematics, philology, and antiquarianism, and woven into a colorful tapestry depicting a world where warp and woof are in God's hands. Pontoppidan made it his task to present his readers with the facts that showed that great transmutations, so this was the empirical ground. Through nearly 500 pages, this bishop and polyhistor presented the testimonies of change that underwrit the fundamental argument that this world is not eternal, but must some 1,000 years ago have taken its beginning, as we can read from the full title. By ascertaining his readers about the novelty of the world, Pontoppidan wanted his books to serve to strengthen the belief of the Christians about the truth of biblical history, again according to the full title of the book. The book is divided in two parts, where the first deals with the novelty of the world grounded on the elements and the order of nature, and part two treats the novelty of the world grounded on historical evidence. The argument for telling the civil history, as he calls it, is treated as self-evident. Historical and political grounds for believing in the novelty of the world are by many considered to be sufficient and suitable to counter incredulity, Pontoppidan argues. Evidence from nature are by some authors considered more problematic, he claims, because they are subject to too many oppositions and counter-arguments. Be that as it may, he says, at least the historical and political proofs have the advantage of having the largest clarity, so that even those who are modestly intelligent can be convinced. In his accounts of the change of human society, Pontoppidan is preoccupied with tracing when and where housing, agriculture, writing, cities, instruments, etc. were first established, to prove that they had an origin which could confirm that humanity was not eternal. He argued that once invented, knowledge would not get lost. The accounts of the transmutation that matter had undergone and would undergo in the future were less about origins than about what was directly observable in the present. And these changes that he charts are curiously revolutionary, or more precisely, they are both abrupt and continuous. Mountains are falling, volcanoes erupting on the one side as sudden events, whereas on the other side, water is diminishing and the earth is moving closer and closer to the sun, slowly but steadily. But on all accounts, the direction is towards the great fire that will consume the world. Time is the principal actor in this drama. Nature works to flatten the surface, decompose the mountains, uplift the valleys, and heighten the ground. Mountains and valleys, writes Pontoppidan, are rather large and crude letters or characters in the book of nature. Accordingly, they are most suitable for the materialistic or only sensuous notion of the coarse infidelity. They are so huge and obvious that even the infidel can understand them. These mountains have either been formed by the deluge or by the subterranean fire. Either or, says Pontoppidan, that is not of importance. But their steady decomposition shows that the surface of the earth would have been totally flat if it was internal. So it is the tooth of time that consume all resistance. He says nothing can oppose the consuming tooth of time. Thus time has a material life, a life that can be read by tracing its work on materials, but time also consumes materiality. Time is the boundary of the world. Space is not an issue here, but time is a temporal texture that involves all that is, the ground, the mountains, the human societies. Pontoppidan claims that the boundary of the household of the world is time, not eternity. This time is the time that God has endowed the world with, and which has its beginning and its end. To what extent do humans have the proper power to change or to impact this unfolding of time? According to Pontoppidan, they were certainly responsible for the fall, for the deluge, and there are clear signs that the earthquake of Lisbon was a punishment from God because of the conduct of humans. So what are we to make of this time? Dipesh Chakrabarty says that the Anthropocene debate entails a constant conceptual traffic between Earth history and world history. And I quote, "There is a widespread recognition now that we are passing through a unique phase of human history when, for the first time ever, we consciously connect events that happen on vast geological scales, such as changes to the whole climate system of the planet, with what we might do in the everyday lives of individuals, collectives, institutions, and nations." In one sense, this is also what the practitioners of Earth history was doing by the end of the 17th and the first half of the 18th century, those who Pontoppidan relied on when he was writing his treatise. They were trying to account for how the Earth had changed and for how the actions of individuals, collectives, and institutions were impacting on the trajectory of the world in their various attempts to defy or challenge the God-ordained order of the world. That certainly does not make them ideal partners in thinking about how to act and think in the present predicament. However, it points to the centrality of human actions in the Judeo-Christian conception of historical change that we have inherited. As historian of science Simon Schaffer states it, early modern Earth theorists made public claims that the historical development of fallen humanity was responsible through physical causes and the providential guidance for the crisis of the globe. So the centrality of Judeo-Christian conceptions of linear progressive time and to the ways history is written is well documented. The historian of geology, Martin Rudvik, insists that from the end of the 18th century, human history became the model for tracing the history of nature. Methods and concepts of the chronologists and antiquaries were deliberately transposed from the human to the natural world. He goes on to state that the major source for this new vision of nature as historical was the strong sense of history embodied in the Judeo-Christian scriptures, with their dynamic narrative thrust from primal creation to pivotal incarnation towards an ultimate city of God. For Rudvik, this means that the great invention of this period was not deep time, but deep history. It means that not only the history of humanity, but also the history of nature then has inherited a conception of time that we need to think carefully about, I think. The problem is simply that what it means to account for the history of the planet and the history of humans, what it means to connect a geological historical timescale with the history of the human everyday life is a real problem. What does it mean to claim that the human actions are responsible for the crisis of the globe, which they did also in the 18th century? In the Judeo-Christian tradition, history leads us to apocalypse, and this is where time's arrow points us in Pontoppidan's treatise. And when our secularized history is written, it is manifestly difficult to bring it in or bring it out of a narrative of progress, expanding complexity, acceleration, which to Pontoppidan are the signs of the world's march toward the end. Thank you. That was it.